Welcome to another episode of Chad's Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. Today's podcast is sponsored by Chax Training and Consulting. If you're interested in supporting the podcast, there are sponsorship opportunities available. So just reach out to us and we can discuss that in more detail. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor, as well as Director of Training Solutions and Principal at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I'm Director of Media Productions over here at Chax Training and Consulting. And Chad and I are both certified as accessible document specialists. In fact, we worked on the test to help bring you all those great questions. And no, we will not give you the answers. But if you want to go take the test or study for it, you can head on over to accessibilityassociation.org/certifications and find out more about that. So head on over there. Those are great people over at IAAP. We love them dearly. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hey, Chad, I got some exciting news.
What is that?
Well, other than shoving 6 inches of galvanized fencing wire through my foot this last week, I am slated. I got approved to speak at Adobe Max on accessibility.
That is awesome.
Dude, I am so excited. Awesome. So for the past couple of years, we've been virtual with Adobe Max, and this is the first year they're back to, in person. And initially it was a little tough trying to get a spot at Adobe Max to speak because, they're trying to pare it back and be, health conscious about COVID. And I mean, there were 17,000 people at the last Adobe Max. It was pretty unwieldy, to be honest. And I really do like the days of San Diego when it was more like 7,000 to 10,000 people. It's much more manageable. So they, but anyway, long story short, they were able to find room in the schedule. So I'm going to be doing an overview of the accessibility features in Illustrator and InDesign and Photoshop and Premiere Pro and After Effects. I'm going through the gambit and just, laying it all out there for everyone. So if you guys are thinking about how does accessibility impact the Creative Cloud libraries and Creative Cloud as a whole, this session is for you. You should come and attend Adobe Max. Registration's open right now at max.adobe.com. So Max with Dax is in full effect. We are going to have it again this year, which is great. So
it's going to be an awesome event. You're going to have a lot of fun. Looking forward to hearing how it goes. And like I said, I think it's cool to have an accessibility session at Adobe Max. You know what I mean? Like, Adobe Max is typically, it's all about creativity, design, and everything. But, I think that the reality is that accessibility is becoming a factor for more and more people. And I think this is going to be a great session to have there.
Well, Chad, it really is about, getting access of information to everybody. And, I really feel like you really, if you have a design or creative conference, you really should have some accessibility sessions in your program. I mean, it's really just a necessity. I mean, the U.S. Census Bureau projects that by 2030, the people who are 65 years and older are going to outnumber their children, right? I mean, it's definitely people are getting, disabilities are becoming more and more prevalent in today's society. And we need to be thinking about that when we create content.
Yep. No, I totally agree. And that's why I think it's so important that we have this event at Adobe Max or this session at Adobe Max, because people need to know about it. And I think people are, they want more information,
right?
They really do. So, it's going to be super cool.
Yeah. Well, people say, oh, well, accessibility doesn't impact the circles I run in or our clients or our customers, but the statistic I have in one of my presentations just recently says that 12 million people 40 years and older have some form of vision disability And that includes 1 million blind people. I mean, blind people are the people we think of most when it comes to disabilities, but 12 million, 11 other million of those people are people with just low vision. So things like color contrast and how we lay things out and the use of consistent heading structure and all the things that we try to build into our accessible documents to make them easier to understand, it all makes an impact on the people trying to digest it. It's not just blind people and screen readers.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So speaking of screen readers, cool. Right? I figured we'd spend today and talk about a PDF that we've kind of been floating around LinkedIn. And if you're not following Chatterai on LinkedIn, feel free to head over there and message us and make that connection. But I figured we'd talk about the 7 accessibility fails that you'd never know were there unless you tested a document with a screen reader with JAWS or NVDA, right?
Yeah, and this is a really cool topic because you know, a lot of times, you know, you think you've done everything right? You know what I mean? You've remediated your PDF. You're like, oh, this is exactly what I need. Everything's looking good. But, you know, as you and I have said before, you know, remediation is a combination of automated and manual checks. And what a lot of what we're going to be covering right now are things that a checker is not going to flag. You know, that the checker is not going to identify a lot of these issues.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I did a session this morning for SMPS. It's a master this series. And we were taught, it was three 1-hour sessions over the course of several days. And today's topic was on InDesign. And we started walking through some of the processes of setting read order and setting styles and all of that. And somebody brought up the question. They said, well, how do I balance my need to get this work done and all the extra stuff I have to do for accessibility? And I completely hear that struggle. It is such a tough question because in the beginning, everything's hard, right? Everything is difficult. And accessibility, especially when all of your documents are designed in a way that doesn't really conform to accessibility, you're constantly having to reset styles or reapply things. You really can't copy and paste from other places without having to reformat it because you need to make sure it's got the right style. It can be a pain. I mean, it really can, right, Chad?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you know, and we get asked that question a lot, don't we?
Yeah.
You know, people are like, oh my gosh, this is so much extra work, you know, and, you know, a lot of it, Dax, goes back to, you know, starting at the very beginning of your process, right? Like the more you can do as early on as possible, the less of an effort all of this becomes.
Right. But for the you know, architectural or engineering firm that's doing, you know, churning out 100 proposals a year, and they've got a library of all this stuff, and they just now are kind of putting their feet into this journey of accessibility, and they've got a library of, you know, 200 project sheets that are not accessible, right? You and I can say all day long, you should start with an accessible document, start with a great style sheet, start with good templates. But the elephant in the room is, yeah, that'd be great if we were starting from scratch. But most of the time we're on a deadline. We're trying to get the document out. It's literally down to the minutes to get it delivered, e-delivered or physically delivered. Chad, there were times I can tell you, I was in the back of a car, spiral rolling by hand, driving to whatever city or state, office to submit a document that was due at no later than 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. or whatever. And we're in the back spiral binding it as someone else is driving the car. It's sometimes that tight.
Oh my gosh.
It is really that tight.
Wow.
Yeah. But I guess to the point though, Chad, right? You would agree that there are some basic things you can do to start moving in that direction, right?
Yes. 100%. 100%. And it all starts with the source document, right? I mean, whether, and again, I mean, you know, our listeners know that you and I are big InDesign users. However, just today, Dax, you were working on a Word document.
Of course.
Right? You know, so it's not, you know, sure. I mean, if I have my my druthers, I guess you could say it that way. If I had my pie in the sky, I'm always working in InDesign. But the reality is our customers don't all use InDesign. And so sometimes the files we get are Word documents, sometimes they're PowerPoint presentations, and of course, sometimes they're PDFs, And so again, but even in Word, even in PowerPoint, if you think about the process at the very beginning, there are things you can do that really streamlines the process. It really streamlines it and reduces the amount of work that you need to do.
Well, let me ask you a question, Chad. So
yeah,
if you're an engineering firm, you've got a template you're already using. Hopefully, most people have a template. It may not be accessible, but there's a template there, right? InDesign and Word have the ability to map an existing style set to a new style set, right?
Yeah.
So theoretically, you could just create that template style set of, here's my accessible styles. What was our heading structure the old way is now going to be this new way with accessibility built into it. And we just import it into our accessible template. And instead of having to one by one go to each of the different styles and kind of map them one for one, you can just import it, set your mapping, and then when it dumps it in, it's all good to go, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of techniques and tools that you can leverage, right? And they're not all going to be, a lot of them are things that you may or may not have ever used before.
Right.
A lot of what we do, Dax, right, is, a lot of teaching how to use the product correctly. Right. And, I've worked with designers who've used InDesign for 15 years. And all of a sudden, here I am saying, well, why don't you use this feature? And they're like, I never used that feature. Like, well, why don't you use this feature? Like, I never used that feature. So it's an education, right? I mean, it's simply an education. And, by the time we're done, sure, we're teaching accessibility, but we're also teaching efficient document workflow. Right. I mean, we're just kind of teaching them a better way of getting their work done.
Well, one of the things that you taught me that I didn't know up until we were trying to troubleshoot the whole idea of grouped elements, grouped figures, grouped drawn items inside InDesign, right, is that a drawn object can have 3 different states to it, right? Or 3 different names, right?
Yeah. So InDesign, and I'm blanking on which version this was. I want to say it might have been InDesign CC 2017. It kind of sticks in my head, but it's not really important. But in one version, the InDesign team came out and said, you know what, we recognize there's a problem. If I draw some objects in InDesign, maybe to represent a flow chart or whatever it may be, I need the ability to tag that as a figure. So the InDesign team said, okay, listen, here's what we're going to do. If you take a bunch of objects and group them together, if you add alternate text to them, we will tag it as a figure. And in the very beginning, I think it worked. I kind of remember it working, Dax, and maybe you can confirm this, but at one point it was working, and then in a future release, it stopped working. And so that was the idea, though. Like, you should be able to add alt text to any object in InDesign, and it'll tag it as a figure. Well, through testing, we realized, well, that's not exactly the case. However, as you were saying, Dax, a frame in InDesign can have 3 separate states, if you will. It could be a text frame, it could be a graphic frame, and it could be an unassigned frame.
And how do they get to that, Chad?
So the way you can, so if you draw a frame using the graphic frame tool, it's going to be a graphic frame. If you draw a frame with the type tool, it's going to be a text frame. And then there's also an unassigned frame tool. But no matter what kind of frame you have, if you go to the object menu, there's a submenu called content.
Right.
And within that content submenu, you can change an object to be graphic frame, text frame, unassigned frame. And it turns out that the there's multiple things going on here, but it turns out the only type of frame that you can turn into a figure by adding alt text is the unassigned frame.
You would think it would be the graphic frame, right? I mean, if
I agree.
A figure is a graphic, you'd think you'd make it a graphic frame and you'd be able to apply alt text and off you go.
I agree 100%. I agree 100%. But what makes it even more interesting, the other, one of the areas where InDesign kind of falls short is the fact that it doesn't artifact graphic, it doesn't artifact drawn objects in your document. And that also applies to tables, right? Your table borders do not get artifacted by default. However, the unassigned frame does.
Huh. Interesting.
So it's very interesting. I mean, it's really, I know I'm getting super deep. I'm sure I'm leading a couple of our listeners astray here because this is like really deep in the bowels of InDesign. But
what's the really takeaway though? What's the takeaway here, right? That you should have everything be unassigned from the unassigned content?
Yeah, like if it's just a shape that you're using and there's no text in it, there's no graphic in it, make sure it's an unassigned frame.
Okay.
And I have a tendency to do this, like I see this a lot, where people will use a text frame just as a colored shape in the background of their design.
Right.
And actually, like the reasoning for that is because InDesign, by default, if you click on a shape with the type tool, it'll convert it to a text frame.
Right.
And a lot of people do it by accident. But typically when I get a file, I will go in there. I actually assigned a keyboard shortcut to this that I can hit a keyboard shortcut and convert it to an unassigned frame.
Ooh,
so
that's a good tip. I'm going to do that. So I have my object export options set as Control-Alt-O for object export options. And I love that shortcut because I just do it instinctively now. But now I've got a new shortcut I've got to go do, set to unassigned for the content. That's awesome. Good stuff, man. Good stuff. So all of you who are drawing your bar charts inside InDesign using those frames, make sure you put those as unassigned objects and you will get the results you expect when you export. So good stuff. So let's go back to what we were talking about before, which is the seven fails that you would never know were there unless you tested with a screen reader. So the first one though, Chad, is really ligatures, right? Ligatures. Yes. Now I will say, here's the thing. Some people say, okay, well then never use ligatures. And my answer is no. You just have to test it to know. Remember, people create fonts. Somebody sat down and made it. And there's a series of glyphs that you have extra beyond the normal A, B, C, D, all the way through the number keys and all of that. You've got things with curly tails and, you've seen some of those scripty fonts where they've got all the extra like calligraphy kind of endings to them or, starting. And all of that gets programmatically developed into the font, including ligatures, right?
Yes.
And if you don't account for the fact that the glyph for FFI, right, is one group, but should have all of the characters of FFI, and you miss it, and you just have FF, then you're going to hear oofs, right? You're going to be missing the I, and right. And in some cases, honestly, I've run across this very often where it's the second F that's missing. So in the case of the word office, and you can download this PDF. If you follow us on LinkedIn, you look at our past posts. It's definitely in mine. I posted it quite a few times. But the word office, OFFICE, is office when there's only one F. And it's definitely audible when you're listening to it and you're reading a document, right?
Yeah. Now, that being said, like I don't want to, and I want to be very clear to our listeners, I don't want to sound like all ligatures are bad.
Right.
Because that's not the case, right? And as you said, Dax, I mean, you know, if you ever have the question, test it with a screen reader. But in my experience, as long as the font is a open type font, which at its core means it's a Unicode based font, I've had very, very good success. Like, I've not had ligatures fail, because within a Unicode font, there is a place for the character that is the FFL or the FFI, or, you know, whatever the ligature is.
Mm-hmm.
And it does appropriately map and is read correctly. So, you know, I guess the moral of the story, as you had said, test it.
Right.
Test it to be sure, you know?
Yeah. Well, and you find it happens a lot in Illustrator or maps that come from ArcGIS, or, you know, some other you know, source where, you know, typography is maybe not the main, you know, focus. And if you're using some cartography font that someone wasn't thinking about the ligatures, you know, it might be a barrier, right? Why don't you start the other one, Chad?
Yes. So the next one is a drop cap, right?
Right.
And it's funny, you know, Dax, you and I just have gone over this too, because I'm getting ready to update my LinkedIn Learning course on advanced accessible PDF files. And these are some of the things I'm going to talk about in that course. But the drop cap, fundamentally what happens when you use a drop cap, and for those of you who are listening, a drop cap is when you take the first letter of a paragraph and you make it considerably larger than the rest of the characters of the paragraph. And it often forces like a couple lines of the paragraph to wrap around the character.
Right.
It's a very elegant looking design piece. I mean, it's lovely, you know, it's wonderful. But in the tag structure, what happens is that first letter is kind of broken apart from the rest of the text. And so like, you know, I'm looking at our screen right now, and you have the text that says drop cap, and the D is very big.
Right.
And so what would end up happening for the screen reader is it would probably say drop cap.
Yep.
You know, because you have that first letter broken apart from the rest of the marked content of that tag.
And
so
Chad,
it creates a problem. Yeah.
And if you have a drop shadow on that drop cap, or you put a stroke on that drop cap, it will say DD-ROP, because the D will get a double entry, one for the outline or the drop shadow, and then one for the actual letter. So you can even have double characters if you're not careful, if you try to get too fancy with it. So there's definitely a way. Matter of fact, that goes for anything. If you create graphic text inside a header or a banner inside InDesign, and you add a stroke to it with an effect, it will create two versions, two copies of that piece of text. And we see that question from time and again in our PDF accessibility Facebook group. By the way, if you guys aren't a member of that, we're approaching 2,700 members, which is awesome.
That's awesome.
So go be a part of that. We've got some pretty cool people in that group, and they give you lots of answers. Matter of fact, somebody just posted 5 questions in a row, and I was like, you know, she put them all into one post, bless her heart, and I'm like, you got to break these up. Can you put these in individual posts so that we can answer each one? Because, you know, when you're first starting out, you have a lot of questions, and, you know, trying to put all of that into one post was a little tough. So we got it all squared away, which is really cool. So the deal is, you can have drop caps. Just realize that when you get ready to make that content accessible, you're going to have a little work to do. You're going to have to go to the tags tree and you know, and fix it. Right.
Yep.
And the next one, right, is setting the title to your document, right? People don't realize that when a document opens with NVDA or JAWS with a screen reader, the first thing that's read is the title of the document if they've set it up for accessibility. If not, it reads the file name, right?
Exactly.
And no one wants
and
yeah, go ahead.
Maybe our listeners are better than we are, Dax, right? Maybe our listeners create very short, concise file names.
Oh, yeah, maybe so. I don't know. I've seen some of those file names, and
some of my file names are ridiculous, and they a lot of times they'll say final at the end and then final, and then
I add final
this time.
I'll add like final 508 or final ADA or final before pre-flight or final before after pack or final pack. I'll add a bunch of stuff on it, or final pack 1 and final pack 2 and so there's all these different things. But remember, guys, a screen reader is going to voice all that. So be tidy, go back through, rename your document something meaningful, so that when they're looking through their file menu, they can find what they're looking for. Also, make sure your document title is meaningful, so that when they open it up, they hear something that makes sense as to what they're looking for, right?
So the next one is your table has no scope assigned to the headers.
Well, why does that matter, Chad? I mean, WCAG says that you don't really have to have scope if you've got columns and rows, straight columns and rows. Why is it important?
Yeah, so it's important. So to be fair, right, if your table only has one header row, sorry, let me say it again. If your table has only one column header or only one, so sorry. If your table has only one column header or only one row header, the scope is assumed, right? So JAWS and NVDA will kind of figure it out, right? But to be on the safe side, it's always good to assign the scope to your table headers, especially if you have more than one header row.
Well, Chad, one thing to remember, though, is that it does not ever assume row headers. So when you're using JAWS or NVDA, the only thing it's going to assume is if your first row is all THs, it's going to assume that those are column headers, but it will never assume or never voice a row header, even if the TH is designated. So why this matters, guys, is because when you're moving through a table and you've got a bunch of data and you're just listening, if you don't have those headers, all you hear is 15, 12, 19, 26. You're like, okay, what is that, right? But if you hear, you might hear column 3, row 5, 15. Oh, okay. But if you have scope set, you're going to hear row 3, column 5, pairs, 15. And you hear that header is announced, right? But if you don't have scope set for the row, you would never know that 15 only belongs to California and not Kentucky or Tennessee or whatever those row headers might be, right? So it's important that we set that scope so that as a person moves through the table, when they change either a column or a row, that it voices the new column or row header so they get the identification of where they are on the table, right?
Yeah, and thanks for correcting me on that, Dax, because I think I misspoke when I was explaining about the header being assumed, because you're absolutely right. The column header can be assumed, right? If you have one row of THs, it kind of assumes it's a column header, but for the row headers, it does not. But the scope is really about a relationship.
Yep.
Right. So the scope is basically you have you have three choices, right? In the scope options, you can set it to a column header, you can set it to a row header, or you can set it to both a column and a row header.
Right. And that's usually that A1 cell, right? I mean, that's
that A1 cell. Yeah. But you know what, Dax, I have to say, like, I very rarely get to use it. Like, very rarely is.
No, I always get excited.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, you're like, oh my gosh, I get to use both.
Very rarely is that cell a header in both directions.
Right.
Like typically it's really only a header in one direction. But I'm with you. I kind of get excited, I'm like, cool.
Because no one designs a table that fancy. They just want to add more columns and rows and, how many rows can we merge together in one thing? And I mean, just all sorts of stuff. So
And you know what, Dax, while we're talking about it, right? Like, wouldn't you say that A1 cell should never be blank?
What CAG says, it should never be blank.
Yeah. But I mean, like, it's always a header for something.
Yep.
Right? I mean, even if you've got row headers, those headers are a category of something. Right.
But people don't want to have to think hard enough about it to actually come up with whatever that name is. They're like, I don't know. It's just a bunch of states. Great states.
That's
right?
true. I mean, that's true. Yep.
Bless your heart, you analytical accounting Excel people, data crunchers. We love you to death. But for as analytical as they can be, I find some of the table structures are the least analytical. So the next one that we are on fail number 5, if you're following along in your PDF. And if you don't have this or you can't find the LinkedIn post, go to our podcast website, chaxchat.com. And in the middle, in the menu, there's a downloads button. And you can actually download this document for yourself if you want to do that, if you don't want to look through the LinkedIn posts, right? So number 5 is meaningful alternate descriptions, right? So Word has a really bad propensity right now to just pull in the file name for the image and call it good. Or, right, Chad, our infamous image of sunglasses or whatever it decides to say. And then in the alt text, what does it say, Chad?
Like it's going to say like C:\users / like the path to that file name.
Right. So you'll hear C:\users / administrators / pictures / whatever. Right. But here's the thing.
Not very helpful.
Not helpful. And who wants to hear all that? And to be fair, if I'm listening to that as a description, I'm just going to stop the screen reader from voicing. As soon as I get to C:\, I've already stopped it because I don't want to hear that crap. I'm just going to move on to the next thing and go, wow, that's an image. I can't tell what it is. The other thing that will happen is that Microsoft Word will say possible image of woman on a park bench.
Oh,
with high degree of probability, right? And you're like, why do you add the high degree of probability in there in the alt text?
It says alternate text generated with high confidence.
High confidence,
is what it
right?
says. I'm like, really?
I don't know. In California, high confidence might mean something else.
That's true.
But yeah,
So while we're talking about this, and this is a little bit of a segue, right? But, a lot of our listeners know that alternate text, at least for PDF UA requirements, needs to have alternate text applied to the hyperlink, right? And I think we talked about this on previous podcasts where, I'm pretty sure that requirement stemmed from a time when we would often say, click here,
right,
or download here, and so they said, well, that's no good, so we need to describe where it's going. Now, most of us are using meaningful text, right, when we create the hyperlink. But what I wanted to say is, in a lot of the documents I work on, it'll implicitly list a hyperlink, right? And so that's so that if the brochure is printed, they can type it on their keyboard, but they're not saying really where they're going. And then so you can't even really use that fix up DAX in Acrobat, because all it's going to do is put the URL as the alternate text, right? Which is not a great solution.
And what you're talking about is in Acrobat, if you go to print in the tools menu, if you go to print production, and then you go to pre-flight, right? And then you hit make sure that your drop down at the top says
PDF standards.
PDF standards. Thank you very much, Chad. And you click on the little blue wrench for single fix up, because all you're trying to do is single, and you type in link. And when you type in link in the search, it comes up and it says create content entry for link annotation. And so what does it do? it says creates content entry for link annotation based on link target. And it's that last part, based on link target. All it does is take whatever the URL you have hyperlinked and dump it into the content key and call it good. Now, it solves PDF UA's requirement, and I have it on good authority that in the future, the content key might be an optional requirement for a standard we all know and love. But we'll have to wait till that's released. But anyway, for right now, all it does is dump whatever the URL was into the content key. So if it's, www/ whatever website / 1625 / C / whatever long URL that we don't want to listen to, how is providing that in alt text giving me any additional information? I mean, I really would love to know that I'm going to go download a 85 meg, 670 page document on planting mushrooms in North Dakota, right? I mean, I want to know where I'm going.
Well, and where I was going with that, Dax, is that when you have those implicit URLs, a really good practice is to go to the website, right? Go to your browser, go to that website, and grab the title of that web page. And that's good information to use as the alternate text for that hyperlink.
Chad, I don't know how many web pages I've gone to where people build WordPress sites and the title of the page is home or contact or, you know.
Do you know what the most commonly named web page is in the world?
It's got to be home.
Untitled page.
Oh,
because if you remember back, I mean, I'm pretty sure Go Live did this. I'm pretty sure Dreamweaver does it. I'm pretty sure Front Page did. I'm doing a super quick Google.
I just did it. 253 million, 253 million untitled page lists. And I'm looking at it.
So I get what you're saying totally, right? But a reputable website will have a descriptive title.
I'm with you.
And I even have a script on my computer that I just run real quick and it copies the title so that I can then go and paste it into the document.
Just because I'm going to do it here, Chad. I'm just looking on page 2. It says untitled page. It's romehospital.org. Appointments may be made by calling Rome Hospital Health Orthopedics and Sports Medicine. And the page is titled Untitled Page. Here's another one. Untitled Page ICDS. Close the calendar. Ministry of Women and Child Development in India. Untitled Page. So it looks like there's a lot of untitled pages in India and elsewhere. I know I've been guilty of it. I'll post something. I'll create a WordPress site and, I'll look and I'm like, oh, it'll say sample page as the title. I'm like, hey, that's probably not what I want for this page, right? But speaking of web pages, go ahead, guys, go over to Accessibility Unraveled and check out what 3 courses we have coming up, right? So we just had our Secrets of Writing Effective Alt Text. And what are the other 2 classes coming up, Chad?
We also have on August 23rd, we have accessible forms.
Yep.
That went really well the last time we did that, Dax. I think a lot of people really enjoyed that. And
that handout that you created was outstanding, dude. I really liked what you did there.
Thank you.
And I think people, if you go to this class, you get this great little workbook and it really helps, definitely.
Yeah. And then on September 1st, we have document testing with NVDA, right? And so, you and I are always preaching to people, right? Test your document using a screen reader.
This is our most popular class by far. It's the one that gets attended the most. Matter of fact, I mean, I think we limit the class specifically because you're going to walk through documents with your screen reader while we're walking you through it. So we can't have 30 people or 40 people in the class because it's too much, right? So we usually limit it to about 10 or 15 people. So if you're interested in taking that class, that one fills up more quicker than the other ones do. And if there's other classes you want to hear, want us to start producing, we've got a lot of classes in the catalog there on the website. Let us know. Send us a LinkedIn message or find us on Facebook, or, send us an email. There's a contact form on our website. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, we absolutely would. Yeah. So the next one, this is, I'm going to be honest, this is a pet peeve of mine, and I see it all the time. So you have headings that are broken into multiple heading tags. And so the question is, well, why does this happen? Well, we all need to remember that the minute you hit that enter key on your keyboard, you are breaking your text into two separate paragraphs, right? Whatever appears before the return and whatever appears after it. And if you do it multiple times, you could end up having 3 or 4 separate paragraphs. And the reason people do it is to avoid hyphenation, or to get a word to break, to get a line to break at a specific location. And they figure out that, we'll just hit return, and it gets the text to look the way they want it to, but structurally it's a bit of a mess. So you could end up having to read like 3 headlines in a row, which could be an odd experience, right? Because a headline should be kind of its own element.
Well, you hear, and so, if it says testing NVDA can save time, right? You're going to hear heading level 1, testing with heading level 1, NVDA can, heading level 1, save time. Who wants to hear heading level 1 3 different times because you wanted to break that text apart into 3 different places? And I spot those a mile away. As soon as you start walking the tags tree, you see H1, H1, H1. You're like, yep, there it is. Yep. Hard returns in the tags tree. So,
how do you avoid it? How do you fix it? Well, one option is the soft return, right? On your keyboard, instead of return, if you press shift return, it will break the line without inserting a new paragraph, right? So it's a way that you could break the paragraph where you want it to without having that new paragraph. But what?
But you have to add that space before you press the soft return. Because if you don't add the space, so if it's testing with NVDA and you want to break it in between with and NVDA, you have to put the space before the soft return. Otherwise, it's going to merge with an NVDA. It's gonna try to combine that word together into one thing.
Yeah, you end up running 2 words together.
Right.
And again, that can read, very, very strange. The other thing you could do, just kind of give you a couple of options. I mean, in InDesign, what I'll often do is just reduce the width of the frame to kind of force the text to wrap within the area. If you're in Word, you can kind of do the same thing by adding a right indent to the paragraph.
Ah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that one.
Yeah. So like on a particular paragraph, if you just increase the right indent, you're forcing the text to wrap within a smaller area.
Yep.
And you can often achieve what you're going for simply by adding a left indent.
Yes.
And then of course in InDesign, I'm a huge fan of no break. We won't go into that right now, but no break allows you to control that without having to use a soft return or any additional character.
That sounds like a white paper, Chad. Maybe you need to write a LinkedIn article on using no break, the power of no break. Right?
I like that. I'm going to have to do that for sure.
Yeah. Well, and our last one, guys, because we're just about out of time here, is captions not voiced. Right? And so this is one of those things where the technical standard causes a fail in screen readers on the market today. So theoretically, a caption should go inside a figure tag. You have the figure, the caption is a element of the figure, but when you do that, NVDA and JAWS will ignore the caption and not read it. And so what you end up with is you just hear the figure and whatever alt text you might have for the figure. Now, PDF UA says, hey, we get that this is an issue. So it's okay to pull that caption tag out of the figure tag so that it reads figure and then caption. But technically, the caption tag is supposed to be read inside the figure. And so if you do it, if you're like, hey, I learned accessibility, I'm doing it the right way, and then you go to test and you're like, oh, it's not being voiced. That's the reason it's not being voiced. So.
Yep. Yeah. It is proper structure, right, Dax, to nest the caption inside of the figure tag. But, current screen readers don't read it. Very frustrating. Very frustrating. We deal with this a lot, don't we? Where the standard says do it this way, but then the screen reader says, nope, I'm not going to follow that standard. And, now we're fighting a losing battle. So
exactly.
So, as much as we're, Dax and I are all about the standard, but we're more about usability.
Yes.
And so, when it comes to things like that, we're always going to err on the side of a better user experience than simply, checking the box.
Yep. Well, guys, as a final note, I just want to let you know, again, we have this document testing with a screen reader class coming up September 1st. We have our forms class coming up on the 23rd of this month. Go sign up. You get a certificate of completion. You get the video for a year. You get some really great handouts. In fact, the 3-page screen reader usability checklist that Chad and I put together is amazing. You won't use all 3 pages because I'm sure you like sanity, but if you ever wanted to check everything possible in a document to make sure that every aspect was conforming to a screen reader and was going to be a good user experience, it's all there for you. We give you a shortcut, a screen reader shortcut key, basics cheat sheet that's kind of a pared down version so that you don't feel overwhelmed. And honestly, it's just a great time. And it honestly, just for a lot of people, it's the first time they've ever actually used a screen reader on your own. And it's doable. You will learn that there are really just a few keys you need to know, right, Chad?
Yeah, listen, I mean, I think it's important to state that, Dax, because I think people get overwhelmed at the idea of having to learn a new product or learn a new thing, they're just adding it to their list. But honestly, when I'm testing, I'm only using a couple keys. Yep. Most of the time, I'm only using a couple of keys, and it's so beneficial. So
if you can press the down
arrow, you're going to
learn
a lot. Yeah, you're going to learn a lot of keys in the class, but to be honest, when you're testing, you're only using a handful of them. So.
If you can press the down arrow, the tab key, the enter key, maybe H or L or K. That's it. I mean, you're really not, it's not this, I think the hardest thing to overcome when you're testing with a screen reader is the fact that it's always on. And we teach you how to silence it temporarily. I think once you get past that, it just is, it's just a thing of beauty. And I will tell you, Chad, I have graduated to a new speed level in my screen reader. I'm now using screen reader with boost on, but it's like 20%. So guys, there are 2 levels of screen reader. There is screen reader 1 through 100%. And then there's boost on, rate boost on. And when you have rate boost on, it's crazy fast. So it's like level up, right? So I was at 100% before rate boost. And then I couldn't get past, I turned rate boost on and have it down to the lowest point, and it was still too fast. I've now graduated and I can have rate boost on at 20%. So I'm getting there.
Yeah. I cannot do that. I'm still slow-mo. I'm turtle. I'm turtle speed, but
that's okay.
Yeah. Well, guys, once again, we want to thank Chax Training and Consulting for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. And just remember, if you're looking for in-person or online training or struggling to establish an accessibility program within your organization, head over to accessibilityunraveled.com. My name is Chad Chilius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where each week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.